The limousine windows blurred with raindrops as Elena sat inside, her trembling hands clutching her swollen belly. The gala had ended for her long before the last champagne glass was poured. She hadn't waited for the speeches or the auction. She couldn't. The whispers, the stares, the pity. It was too much. Gabriel had wanted to escort her home, but she refused. Her pride a fragile shield she wasn't ready to let him pierce. She needed to be alone. She needed to fall apart without anyone watching. By the time the car reached the Kane penthouse, Elena was unraveling. She stumbled inside, the once luxurious space now feeling like a cavern of betrayal. The marble floors that had once dazzled her seemed icy. The chandeliers mocked her with their sparkle. Every surface carried his presence, his lies, his mistress's scent. She dropped to her knees in the living room, sobs ripping through her chest. Her body shook violently as her tears hit the polished floor. "Why?" she whispered to the emptiness. "Why wasn't I enough?" The silence answered her, cruel and indifferent. She crawled toward the nursery, a room she had painted in soft creams and grays, filled with stuffed animals and sketches of houses she had drawn herself. She had dreamed of rocking her baby to sleep here, of building a home full of warmth, where her child would never feel the loneliness she had known. But now those dreams felt shattered. Adrian didn't want the baby. He didn't want her. He had paraded his mistress before the world and left her humiliated. Her chest tightened as panic set in. How would she raise this child alone? How would she survive when the man who promised to protect her had instead destroyed her? She pressed her forehead against the crib's edge, her tears soaking into the wood. The tiny kicks inside her belly only deepened her agony. The baby was real, alive, depending on her, and she felt utterly powerless. Hours passed, or maybe only minutes. Time blurred when pain took over. At some point, she dragged herself to the balcony, the city's lights stretching endlessly before her. Cars raced below, horns echoing, but she felt completely isolated. A single thought haunted her. Maybe Adrian was right. Maybe she wasn't strong enough. Maybe she was the burden. Her hand gripped the balcony rail, cold metal biting into her skin. The winter wind whipped through her hair, chilling her damp cheeks. She closed her eyes, whispering broken words into the night. "I can't do this. I can't fight him. I'm not enough." Her phone buzzed suddenly on the table inside, its harsh sound jolting her. She hesitated, then stepped back inside and picked it up. It was her mother's old number, disconnected years ago, but saved in her contacts as a reminder of the woman who had once carried her through storms. Elena's vision blurred with fresh tears. She remembered her mother's voice, strong and steady. "You are more than you think, Mia, and when the world tries to break you, you rise." Elena collapsed onto the couch, clutching her belly, sobbing into the darkness. For now, she was broken. For now, despair had won. But in the faint flutter of her baby's heartbeat against her ribs, she heard a fragile promise of tomorrow. Tonight, she surrendered to the storm inside her. But tomorrow, something new would begin. The morning after the gala, Elena expected only silence and shame. She hadn't slept. Her swollen eyes and pale skin made her reflection almost unrecognizable. She thought of staying in bed, of hiding from the world, but the world was already knocking. Literally. The sharp rap of knuckles on the penthouse door startled her. She shuffled to open it, bracing herself for Adrian's wrath or Sienna's mockery. But it wasn't either of them. It was Gabriel Hunt. Tall, broad-shouldered, with steel-gray eyes that could silence a boardroom, Gabriel was the last man she expected to see standing in her doorway. He carried no pity in his expression, only a steady calm. "Elena," he said softly, "you shouldn't be alone right now." She froze, her hand tightening on the doorframe. "Why are you here?" "Because I saw what happened last night," he replied, "and because you need to know something." Before she could protest, Gabriel stepped inside, his presence filling the empty, suffocating penthouse with a strange kind of safety. He looked around, his gaze lingering on the half-finished nursery. "He doesn't deserve you," Gabriel said bluntly, "or this child." Elena's throat tightened. "Don't," she whispered. "Don't pretend you understand." But Gabriel did understand, more than she realized. He hesitated, then lowered his voice. "Adrian has made enemies, Elena, powerful ones. I've been following his trail for months. The cheating, the shady deals, the lies. Last night was only the tip of the iceberg. His empire isn't as untouchable as he wants everyone to believe." Her heart pounded. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," Gabriel leaned closer, his voice firm, "that the man who humiliated you is already standing on quicksand. And I have proof." From inside his coat, Gabriel pulled out a slim folder. He laid it on the coffee table, sliding it toward her. Elena hesitated before opening it. Inside were photographs, financial documents, and emails. They'd painted a damning picture. Adrian funneling money through shell companies, bribing officials, covering up deals with falsified contracts. Her stomach dropped. This could ruin him. Gabriel's eyes held hers. "It will. But that's not why I'm showing you. I want you to understand that you're not powerless. He wanted you to feel small, invisible, but you're not. You have the truth. And with the right support, you can fight back." Elena shook her head, overwhelmed. "I can't. I don't know how. I don't have your strength." "You don't need mine," Gabriel said gently. "You already have your own. You just don't see it yet." Tears welled in her eyes. For months, she had been dismissed, silenced, betrayed. Now, for the first time, someone was telling her she mattered, that she wasn't weak. She pressed her hand to her belly, feeling the faint kick beneath her skin. Her child's heartbeat was steady, strong, a reminder that she had something worth fighting for. "Why are you helping me?" she whispered. Gabriel's expression softened, almost pained. "Because once, a long time ago, your mother saved my family's business from collapse. I never forgot that debt. And because—" He paused, his gaze lingering on her. "Because no woman should ever be left to fight a battle like this alone." Elena's tears spilled freely now. But they weren't just tears of sorrow. They were the first drops of hope. For the first time since her world had shattered, she felt the faint flicker of power stirring inside her. She didn't know how or when, but she knew one thing for certain. Adrian Kane's reign of cruelty was not going to last. And this time, she would not stand alone. For days after Gabriel's visit, Elena wrestled with fear and doubt. The folder of documents sat on her coffee table like a ticking bomb, daring her to act. Every time she passed it, she felt torn between collapsing under its weight and opening it again, reminding herself that Adrian's empire was built on lies. But one morning, as she stood in front of the mirror, something inside her shifted. Her reflection startled her. Pale skin, hollow cheeks, swollen eyes from nights of crying. She barely recognized herself. And then she remembered Sienna's cruel smirk at the gala, Adrian's cold words, "This baby will ruin everything." Her chest tightened, not with grief, but with anger. "No more," she whispered to the woman in the mirror. That day, Elena made a choice. She would no longer play the quiet wife, the fragile woman everyone pitied. She would fight, for herself, for her child, for the dignity Adrian had tried to steal. Her first step was simple but symbolic. She booked an appointment at a salon in Midtown, a place she had once been too timid to enter. Hours later, she walked out transformed. Her long hair, once always pulled into a modest bun, now flowed in soft waves around her face. Her makeup was subtle but sharp, highlighting the determination in her eyes. When she caught her reflection in a store window, she almost didn't recognize the confident woman staring back. Next came her wardrobe. Gone were the plain dresses Adrian had mocked as sweet but boring. With Gabriel's discreet help, Elena replaced them with tailored suits and elegant gowns, clothes that didn't just cover her body but announced her presence. She wasn't dressing for Adrian anymore. She was dressing for battle. But the real transformation wasn't physical. It was in her mind. She began spending evenings at Gabriel's office, learning from him and his team of advisors. Contracts, business negotiations, legal strategies, concepts that once seemed foreign became weapons in her hands. Gabriel never treated her like a victim. He treated her like an equal, a partner in this war. Each lesson chipped away at the self-doubt Adrian had planted in her, replacing it with resolve. Late at night, she would return to the nursery, her hand resting on her belly. "We're going to be okay," she whispered to her unborn child. "I promise you'll grow up knowing your mother wasn't weak. She fought for you. For us." The more she studied Adrian's crimes, the more she realized how fragile his empire truly was. He had built towers of glass, polished for the world to admire, but one stone, one truth, could shatter them. The moment of her rebirth came unexpectedly. Gabriel invited her to a small charity event, nothing like Adrian's grand galas, but filled with influential people nonetheless. Elena hesitated, her nerves buzzing, but when she entered the room, conversations paused, heads turned. She was radiant. Not because of the gown she wore or the jewels at her ears, but because of the quiet fire in her eyes. People who had pitied her weeks before now whispered in awe. And when Gabriel introduced her as a woman of remarkable strength, she didn't shrink. She met every gaze head-on. Her chin lifted. It was in that moment Elena realized something powerful. She was no longer living in Adrian's shadow. She was stepping into her own light. The timid wife who once whispered promises in the dark was gone. In her place stood a woman ready to take back everything that had been stolen, and to make Adrian Kane regret the day he underestimated her. The ballroom at the Astoria Grand was dripping in gold and glass, a cathedral of excess where the city's wealthiest gathered to worship power. Chandeliers sparkled above silk-draped tables, waiters glided with trays of champagne, and a string quartet filled the air with music that sounded like triumph. Tonight was Adrian Kane's night, or so he thought. He arrived with Sienna on his arm, both of them dressed to command attention. Sienna's dress was another shade of crimson, daring the world to look at her. Adrian strutted like a king surveying his kingdom, shaking hands, flashing that camera-ready smile. He believed the whispers from the last gala had faded. He believed he had silenced the scandal. But then the doors opened. The room seemed to pause as Elena Rivera stepped inside. She wore a gown of midnight blue, its sleek lines accentuating the graceful curve of her pregnancy. Diamonds sparkled at her ears, a subtle crown of defiance. But it wasn't the gown or the jewels that stole the room, it was her presence. Her chin was lifted, her eyes steady, her every step radiating strength. She was no longer the trembling wife in the shadows. She was a woman transformed. On her arm was Gabriel Hunt. His tailored suit, his quiet authority, his unwavering gaze, all of it announced that Elena was no longer alone. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Cameras clicked, phones were raised. The image was undeniable. Adrian Kane's pregnant wife, radiant and unbroken, walking into the room with one of the most powerful billionaires in America at her side. Adrian's smile froze. Sienna's hand tightened on his arm, her nails digging into his sleeve. "What is she doing here?" she hissed. Elena's gaze found them across the room. For a long, charged moment, the past and present collided. Adrian's arrogance faltered. Sienna's smirk vanished. And Elena? She simply smiled, a calm, devastating curve of her lips that told the entire room who held the power now. Gabriel guided her toward the stage where the evening's keynote speaker was to be announced. But before the host could step forward, Gabriel raised a hand. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice resonating through the hall. "Allow me to introduce someone truly remarkable, Elena Rivera." The applause began cautiously, then swelled as Elena took the microphone. She didn't flinch. Her voice was steady, every word cutting through the gilded air. "For too long, women like me have been silenced, dismissed, betrayed. Tonight, I choose not to hide. Tonight, I choose to stand." Whispers surged, eyes turned toward Adrian, who was flushing crimson beneath the chandeliers. Elena continued, her hand resting gently on her belly. "This child, my child, is not a burden. He is my strength, and no amount of power or cruelty will erase that truth." The room erupted in applause. Cameras flashed. Adrian's empire of control cracked with every clap, every cheer that celebrated the woman he had tried to destroy. Sienna leaned closer to him, her voice sharp. "Do something." But Adrian couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. The narrative he had crafted, the control he had clung to, was slipping away. And Elena stood in the center of it all, radiant, unshaken, untouchable. For the first time in his charmed life, Adrian Kane was not the man the world admired. He was the man the world pitied. And Elena Rivera, the woman he thought he had broken, was the one everyone would remember. The silence after Elena's speech lingered like a heartbeat before thunder. Then applause erupted, louder than the music, louder than the whispers. The ballroom, once Adrian Kane's stage, now belonged to her. Guests rose from their chairs, clapping until their palms stung, not just for Elena's words, but for the strength blazing in her eyes. Adrian stood frozen, a man stripped bare in front of the very world he craved to impress. His hand twitched at his side, but no words came. His empire had been built on intimidation and spectacle. Tonight, Elena had turned spectacle against him. Cameras flashed, capturing his humiliation. The billionaire who abandoned his pregnant wife, while she stood radiant, unbroken, in the spotlight. Sienna tried to salvage the moment, forcing a brittle laugh. "She's just playing the victim," she whispered loudly enough for those nearby to hear. But the crowd wasn't buying it. Her words fell flat, dissolving into the air like smoke. No one applauded her. No one looked at her with admiration. She was invisible, a shadow next to Elena's glow. Gabriel stepped forward, placing a steadying hand on Elena's back. He didn't need to speak. His presence alone told the world whose side he stood on. The press surged closer, their questions flying. "Elena, will you file for divorce?" "Elena, is Gabriel Hunt supporting you financially?" "Elena, what will happen to Adrian Kane's company now?" Elena raised her hand, silencing them. "This isn't about wealth or power," she said firmly. "It's about truth. It's about never letting anyone silence you, no matter how powerful they seem. My child deserves a mother who stands tall. And tonight, I do." The applause swelled again, rolling through the golden ballroom like a tide that swept away pity and replaced it with respect. Adrian's mask cracked. He pushed past Sienna, his voice breaking. "Elena, we can fix this. Don't do this here." She turned to him, her gaze calm, unflinching. "You already did this here, Adrian. You made your choice the night you brought her into our lives. Tonight, I make mine." Her words were final, sharp as glass. Adrian flinched as though struck. Around him, the crowd shifted, away from him, toward her. Power was no longer his currency. Shame was. Sienna's smile collapsed. She stepped aside, her hand slipping from Adrian's arm. The same ambition that had drawn her to him was now driving her away. A man stripped of power was no use to her, and she knew the cameras were catching it all. Gabriel guided Elena off the stage, his arms strong around her shoulders. As they left, Elena looked back one last time. Adrian stood alone in the glittering room, abandoned by the mistress he'd chosen, shamed by the wife he'd scorned, surrounded by people who no longer feared him. His empire hadn't crumbled yet, but everyone could see the cracks, and those cracks would widen. Outside, the night air was cold, but Elena felt something warm unfurl inside her. For the first time in months, she could breathe without pain. She pressed her hand to her belly, whispering to her child, "We're free." Gabriel glanced at her, his expression steady. "This is just the beginning," he said. And Elena, no longer the fragile woman who once begged for scraps of love, nodded. She had lost everything she thought to find her, but in truth, she had gained more than she ever dreamed. Dignity, strength, and the promise of a future, built not on lies, but on courage. The night ended not with Adrian Kane's victory, but with Elena Rivera's rebirth. The morning after the gala, Adrian Kane woke to a storm. Not the quiet drizzle of rumors he was used to brushing aside, but a hurricane of headlines screaming his disgrace. Billionaire ignores pregnant wife seen flaunting mistress instead. Gabriel Hunt defends Elena Rivera, the power shift no one expected. Kane empire shaken by scandal, investors demand answers. Every newspaper, every gossip column, every financial site carried the same images. Elena radiant on stage, Gabriel steady at her side, Adrian standing frozen, powerless. The man who once controlled the narrative now couldn't buy silence at any price. At Kane Holdings headquarters, the tension was palpable. The sleek glass building that had once felt like a fortress was now buzzing with unrest. Employees whispered in hallways. Assistants avoided his gaze. His board of directors, usually obedient, demanded an emergency meeting. Adrian stormed into the boardroom, his jaw tight, his confidence an act he was barely holding together. "This is a distraction," he barked, slamming the newspaper onto the polished table. "The press exaggerates. We've weathered worse." But his board wasn't buying it. One director, an older man with sharp eyes, leaned forward. "Adrian, this isn't just gossip. Clients are pulling contracts. Investors are asking if Kane Holdings is stable with you at the helm. You've turned a personal scandal into a corporate liability." Another added, "And Gabriel Hunt's involvement complicates everything. He's already circling our partners, offering deals behind your back. If this continues, we won't just lose reputation, we'll lose control." For the first time, Adrian felt the boardroom slipping from his grip. The men and women who once hung on his every word now questioned his judgment. His empire, the one he had built brick by brick, was tilting under the weight of his arrogance. Meanwhile, the press wasn't letting go. Paparazzi swarmed the streets outside his penthouse. Reporters camped in the lobby, shouting questions every time he stepped into public view. Adrian, do you deny the affair? Will you divorce Elena? Is Kane Holdings collapsing? And worst of all, his sponsors and business partners were cutting ties. A luxury brand canceled a joint project citing moral concerns. A bank delayed a multi-million-dollar loan. The cracks in his empire widened by the hour. Sienna tried to reassure him, curling against him in the privacy of his penthouse. They'll forget, she purred. The world loves a comeback story. You just need to remind them who you are. But Adrian shoved her away, his frustration boiling over. Do you think this is about me? This is about her. Elena. She's turning everyone against me. Sienna's smile faltered. For the first time, she saw not the untouchable billionaire, but a man cornered, desperate, and losing. The shine that had drawn her was fading, and with it, her loyalty. Across the city, Elena sat with Gabriel in his office, watching the chaos unfold on a wall of TV screens. Headlines scrolled across every channel. Gabriel handed her a cup of tea, his tone steady. He's unraveling faster than I expected. Elena's hands trembled, but her voice was firm. He thought he could destroy me. He never imagined I'd fight back. Gabriel's gaze softened. You're not just fighting back, Elena. You're winning. And she was. For every headline that dragged Adrian down, Elena's strength rose higher. The world that once pitied her now applauded her resilience. The woman Adrian tried to silence had become the voice everyone was listening to. The fall of Adrian Kane had begun, and there would be no stopping it. Sienna Cross had always known how to read a room. Ambition was her compass, and it never failed her. For months, she had ridden Adrian Kane's coattails, basking in his power, enjoying the whispers of envy from women who wished they were in her shoes. But power was a fragile currency, and now it was slipping through his fingers like sand. In the days following the gala disaster, Sienna watched Adrian unravel. The man who once commanded boardrooms now spent his mornings raging at newspapers, his afternoons pacing the penthouse, and his nights drowning in expensive whiskey. His phone, once buzzing with invitations and opportunities, now rang with canceled deals and boardroom ultimatums. And Sienna? She wasn't blind. She saw the headlines shifting, painting her not as glamorous, but as complicit. The other woman who helped break a family, one article screamed. Her social media was flooded with venom. Homewrecker, gold digger, snake. It stung, but more than that, it scared her. Reputation was survival in her world, and she was drowning with Adrian. One evening, as Adrian ranted about Elena's manipulation, Sienna sat on the velvet sofa, filing her nails, her mind elsewhere. He slammed a glass against the wall, shards scattering across the floor. She's ruining everything, he roared. I gave her everything, and this is how she repays me? Sienna's lips curved in a cold smile. You gave her nothing, she thought, but didn't say. Out loud, she purred. Maybe if you fought smarter instead of louder, you'd still be in control. Adrian spun on her, his eyes bloodshot. What's that supposed to mean? It means, she said smoothly, crossing her legs, you're losing. And I don't plan to lose with you. Adrian blinked, stunned by her bluntness. For the first time, he realized the woman who had fueled his arrogance was no longer fully on his side. The very next day, Sienna scheduled a discreet lunch with a journalist. Over champagne, she played the victim, claiming Adrian had manipulated her, that she hadn't known he was still devoted to his wife. He told me the marriage was over, she sighed dramatically, letting tears pool in her eyes. I never wanted to hurt anyone. The article dropped the following morning. Mistress speaks out, claims Adrian Kane lied to everyone. Adrian exploded when he read it. You backstabbing little. Sienna cut him off, her tone icy. Don't blame me for your downfall. You were already crumbling. I'm just making sure I don't go down with you. It was the final crack in what had once been their alliance. Sienna stopped attending his events. She started returning calls from his rivals. And in private, she whispered offers to anyone willing to listen. Information, documents, little pieces of Adrian's empire she had collected during their affair. She had once imagined herself as Mrs. Kane, draped in diamonds, untouchable. Now she saw a different future, one where Adrian was disgraced and she re-emerged as the survivor, the clever woman who escaped the wreckage. But what Sienna didn't realize was that her betrayal was only adding fuel to the fire Elena and Gabriel had already lit. Every word she leaked, every accusation she hinted at, only tightened the noose around Adrian's empire. And soon, the man who thought he owned her would learn the cruelest lesson of all. When ambition and betrayal collide, love, or what passed for it, doesn't stand a chance. The courtroom buzzed with a low hum. Reporters crammed into the back rows, their pens poised like daggers. The Kane divorce hearing wasn't just another case, it was a spectacle, a trial of power and betrayal that the entire city wanted to witness. Cameras weren't allowed inside, but sketches and transcripts would be splashed across every front page by morning. Elena sat at the plaintiff's table, her hands resting on the swell of her belly. She wore a navy dress that spoke of quiet authority, her hair pinned back neatly. Beside her sat Gabriel's legal team, one of the sharpest in New York. Across the aisle, Adrian Kane leaned back in his chair, his expensive suit pressed to perfection, his smirk daring anyone to believe he could lose. At his side was a high-powered attorney known for tearing opponents apart. The judge entered, calling the room to order. For a moment, silence reigned. Then the case began. Adrian's lawyer struck first, his voice sharp. "Your Honor, this is nothing but a vindictive attempt by Mrs. Rivera to smear my client's name. She was fully aware of the state of their marriage and is now attempting to use a pregnancy as leverage." Gasps fluttered through the audience. Elena's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. She didn't have to. Not yet. Her lawyer rose, calm and composed. "Your Honor, what we have here is not just a broken marriage, but a deliberate campaign of cruelty and financial deceit. We intend to show not only infidelity, but evidence of fraud and misconduct that directly impacts Kane Holdings." The judge's eyes sharpened. "Proceed." And then the evidence unfolded. One by one, documents Gabriel had unearthed were presented. Offshore accounts, falsified contracts, records of hush money paid to keep Sienna silent. The courtroom shifted uneasily as each page landed on the judge's bench. Adrian's smirk faltered, his knuckles whitening around the arm of his chair. But the climax came when Elena herself took the stand. She rose slowly, steady despite the weight she carried. Sworn in, she faced the courtroom not as a victim, but as a woman who had endured enough. Her voice was clear, resonant. "Adrian Kane is not the man you think he is," she began. "Behind the charm, behind the headlines, is someone who thought he could control everyone around him. Me, our child, even this city. He told me my baby was a mistake. He told me to erase it, as if life was disposable. But this child is not a mistake. This child is the proof that no amount of power can silence truth." The courtroom was silent, every ear straining for her next words. Adrian shifted uncomfortably, his lawyer whispering frantically at his side. Elena's gaze swept the room, landing on him. "He paraded his mistress in public while I carried his child. He humiliated me, tried to break me. But today, I am not broken. Today, I stand for myself and for the life he tried to deny." Applause threatened to break out before the judge banged her gavel for order. But the point was made. When Adrian was finally called to testify, his arrogance cracked. Cross-examined with the evidence Sienna had unknowingly fueled, he stammered, contradicted himself, and lashed out. The mask of the golden billionaire slipped, revealing a desperate man cornered by his own lies. By the end of the day, the verdict wasn't official, but the court of public opinion had already spoken. Elena had stood tall. Adrian had crumbled, and everyone in that room knew whose side history would remember. The Kane penthouse, once a fortress of arrogance, now echoed with silence. Adrian Kane stood by the window, his reflection fractured in the glass, the city lights mocking him with every flicker. For weeks, his empire had been unraveling, clients gone, investors retreating, board members circling like vultures, and the woman he once called weak, she was the one tightening the noose. Adrian poured himself another glass of whiskey, his hands shaking. He had fought battles before, lawsuits, scandals, hostile takeovers, but this was different. This was personal. Elena's testimony in court had been devastating, not just to his case, but to his image. Overnight, he had gone from golden billionaire to disgraced husband. There was only one option left. He had to face her. The next morning, Adrian arrived at Gabriel Hunt's office unannounced. The receptionist froze, unsure whether to call security. But before she could, Elena appeared from the conference room, her hand resting on her belly, her presence commanding the room. For a moment, Adrian's arrogance flickered back to life. He forced a smile, the one that had once charmed her into believing in him. "Elena," he said smoothly. We need to talk. Alone. Gabriel stepped forward, but Elena raised her hand, stopping him. It's fine, she said calmly. She turned to Adrian. 5 minutes, that's all you get. They stepped into a smaller office. The door clicked shut, leaving them in tense silence. Adrian dropped the charm. His voice cracked. I made mistakes. I was blinded. But we can fix this. You don't have to go through with the divorce. Think of our child. Don't you want him to have a father? Elena's eyes narrowed. A father who told me to kill him before he was born? That's the father you think he deserves? Adrian flinched. I didn't mean it like that. I was under pressure. The company, the board, it was too much. But I can change. I will change. Elena shook her head, her voice steady, cold. You'll never change, Adrian. You don't want me. You don't want this baby. You only want control. He stepped closer, desperation in his eyes. Please, Elena, we can rebuild. I'll cut Sienna off. She cut him off with a sharp laugh. You think this is about her? This is about you. You broke us long before she ever existed. Adrian's mask slipped completely. His knees bent, his voice lowered to a plea. Don't do this. Don't take everything from me. Elena stared at him, stunned by the sight. The man who once stood tall, who commanded boardrooms with a glance, was now begging at her feet, and she felt nothing. No pity, no regret, only clarity. You took everything from yourself, Adrian, she said quietly. I'm just refusing to carry your sins any longer. She turned toward the door. His voice cracked one last time. Elena, please. She didn't look back. She opened the door, walking past him with her head high. Gabriel was waiting in the hall, his eyes asking the silent question. Elena nodded once, her expression unshaken. It's over. Behind her, Adrian remained in the office, crumpled in the chair, a man who had lost not just his wife and child, but the illusion of power that had defined him. For the first time, Adrian Kane wasn't feared, admired, or envied. He was pitied, and for Elena, that was justice enough. Sienna Cross had always prided herself on survival. She wasn't the type to sink with a sinking ship, and Adrian Kane's ship was plunging fast. The headlines that once whispered admiration now screamed disgrace. His empire was cracking, and with every day that passed, Elena Rivera rose higher in the public's eyes while Adrian sank deeper into ruin. And Sienna? She was being dragged down with him. Reporters camped outside her building. Paparazzi followed her into boutiques, snapping pictures of her carrying shopping bags while the world labeled her a homewrecker. Her Instagram comments overflowed with hate. You ruined a family. You'll get what you deserve. Snake. At first, she tried to ignore it. She clung to Adrian's promises that they'd weather the storm, that his lawyers would silence Elena, that money could buy back respect. But after the courtroom showdown, she saw the truth. Adrian wasn't untouchable anymore. He was weak, cornered, desperate, and weakness repulsed her. One evening, Sienna walked into the penthouse to find Adrian slumped on the couch, an empty bottle of whiskey at his feet. He looked up, his eyes red-rimmed, his voice hoarse. Where have you been? Sienna set down her purse with calculated calm. Out, meeting people who still have influence. His brow furrowed. What's that supposed to mean? She smiled coldly. It means I'm not going down with you. Adrian shot to his feet, rage igniting. You ungrateful little... But Sienna only laughed, the sound sharp and cutting. Ungrateful. Adrian, you were supposed to be my ticket to the top. Instead, you've become a liability. Do you have any idea how many doors have closed on me since you paraded me like a prize? Everyone thinks I'm pathetic for staying with you. And they're right. Before he could answer, she pulled out her phone and placed it on the table. The screen lit up with messages, emails, photos, voice recordings. Proof of Adrian's secret deals, his offshore accounts, his whispered threats. She had kept everything, a collection of ammunition she once thought she'd never need. Now, it was her salvation. I've already spoken to the press, she said smoothly. Tomorrow they'll have the full story about your fraud, your bribes, your pathetic attempts to cover it up. And I'll tell them how you lied to me too. How you promised me the world and left me with nothing but your scandal. Adrian's face drained of color. You wouldn't. Oh, I would, Sienna said, her smile venomous. Because unlike you, I know how to survive, and survival means sacrifice. This time, it's you. The next morning, the headlines exploded again. Adrian Kane's Mistress speaks out, reveals proof of fraud and infidelity. Insider betrayal. Kane empire implodes under leaked evidence. News anchors dissected every word of Sienna's interviews. She sat in front of cameras, crocodile tears sliding down her cheeks as she played the victim. "He used me," she sobbed. "I thought he loved me, but he lied about everything. I was just another pawn in his game." The world devoured her story, and though many saw through her act, it didn't matter. The damage was done. Adrian was finished. In boardrooms across the city, investors severed ties. The SEC launched investigations, lawsuits piled high, and Adrian Kane, once the golden billionaire, was now nothing more than a headline. Fraud, betrayal, collapse. Sienna had saved herself, or so she thought. What she didn't realize was that by selling Adrian out, she had written her own downfall. Because survival built on betrayal never lasts. The boardroom of Kane Holdings was once Adrian's throne. He had strutted across its polished floors like a king, every decision unquestioned, every command obeyed. But on this morning, the same room felt like a tribunal. The air was thick, the faces around the mahogany table grim, unsympathetic. Adrian entered with his usual swagger, but it was a brittle act. His suit was impeccable, but his eyes were bloodshot. His smile a shadow of arrogance that no longer convinced anyone. The chairman of the board, a man Adrian had once bullied into silence, cleared his throat. "Mr. Kane," he began, voice clipped, "the board has reached a decision." Adrian smirked, trying to cut through the tension. "Let me guess, you want to lecture me about headlines again? Don't worry, it'll blow over." But no one laughed. "This is not about gossip," the chairman continued. "This is about your reckless behavior, your misuse of company funds, and the scandals that have gutted investor confidence. Effective immediately, you are removed as CEO of Kane Holdings." The words hit like a hammer. Adrian blinked, stunned. "Removed? You can't remove me. This is my company." Another board member slid a folder across the table. "Not anymore. We have the votes, the documents, and the legal authority. You've become a liability, Adrian, and liabilities get cut." Adrian's hands shook as he flipped through the folder. Signatures stared back at him. Every board member aligned against him. Even his oldest allies had turned. Rage clawed up his throat. "You traitors. After everything I built, everything you owe me, you dare." But his voice cracked, drowned out by the chairman's calm authority. "Security will escort you out. Effective today, you are barred from entering this building." Two guards stepped forward. Adrian's chest heaved as he looked around the table, searching for a single sympathetic face. There was none. The men and women who once bowed to him now avoided his gaze, eager to distance themselves from the carcass of his power. "This isn't over," he snarled, his voice echoing off the glass walls. "You'll regret this. Every last one of you." But the guards were already guiding him toward the door. By the time Adrian stepped into the lobby, cameras were waiting. Reporters swarmed, microphones thrust in his face. "Mr. Kane, how do you respond to being ousted? Did your mistress betray you? Is Kane Holdings finished?" He shoved past them, but the humiliation was complete. The man who once dictated the city's skyline was now nothing more than a disgraced figure stumbling toward a waiting car. News of his removal spread like wildfire. Stock tickers flashed red, late-night hosts mocked him. "From golden boy to cautionary tale," one quipped. Social media lit up with memes, mocking images of Adrian's frozen smirk at the gala compared to his defeated face leaving the boardroom. And at home, the final blow landed. His penthouse, once his sanctuary, was eerily empty. Sienna had packed her things and vanished, leaving behind nothing but a mocking note. "Thanks for the ride." Adrian crumpled into a chair, his head in his hands. The empire he had built, the image he had worshipped, the control he had cherished, all gone. He had thought himself untouchable. Now he was stripped bare, abandoned, powerless. For Adrian Kane, the fall was not just financial, it was absolute. And the city that once admired him now relished his ruin. The city was buzzing. Adrian Kane's downfall dominated headlines, but alongside it, another story was rising, a story the public found far more compelling. Elena Rivera, the woman once humiliated and abandoned, was becoming a symbol of resilience. Her face appeared on magazine covers, not as a victim, but as a woman of strength, grace, and dignity. And standing quietly but firmly at her side was Gabriel Hunt. Gabriel had always preferred the shadows of power, letting his wealth and influence speak for him. But now he stepped into the light, not for himself, but for her. It began with small gestures. arriving at court by her side, ensuring she was never photographed alone, shielding her from invasive reporters with a protective arm. Whispers started. Were they just allies, or was there more? The answer came at the Hunt Foundation Charity Gala, an event far removed from Adrian's gaudy spectacles. Unlike the Kane galas, this one wasn't dripping with excess but radiated class. Leaders, innovators, and philanthropists filled the room, eager to support a cause rather than flaunt themselves. When Elena entered on Gabriel's arm, the atmosphere shifted. She wore a gown of deep emerald, her posture regal, her smile calm but unshakable. The child she carried was no longer a source of whispers but of admiration. People leaned toward one another, whispering, "She looks radiant. She's stronger than ever." Gabriel Hunt chose her. Throughout the evening, Gabriel stayed close, attentive but never overbearing. When a guest tried to corner Elena with intrusive questions about Adrian, Gabriel stepped in, his tone polite but firm. "Mrs. Rivera isn't here to discuss the past. Tonight is about the future." And then, as the orchestra quieted and the evening's keynote began, Gabriel took the stage. "Tonight," he said, his voice carrying easily through the hall, "we gathered to support families, to give hope where there was despair. But I want to speak of one family in particular." Elena's heart pounded as every eye turned toward him. He gestured toward her. "Elena Rivera has shown the world what true strength looks like. When faced with betrayal, she chose dignity. When told to break, she chose to rise. She is not just a mother-to-be. She is a woman of courage, and it is my honor to stand beside her, not just as a friend, but as someone who believes in her child, and in the future we can build together." Gasps rippled through the audience, followed by thunderous applause. Reporters scribbled furiously, cameras clicked. It was the confirmation the world had been waiting for. Gabriel Hunt wasn't just Elena's ally. He was her partner, her protector, perhaps even her love. Elena's cheeks flushed, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. She had expected support, but not this, never this. The man she had once thought out of reach had placed her not behind him, not beneath him, but beside him, as an equal. Later, as the gala wound down, Gabriel found her on the balcony, the city lights glowing behind them. "I didn't mean to overwhelm you," he said quietly, "but I couldn't stay silent any longer. You deserve more than whispers in the dark. You deserve the world to know you are valued." Elena's voice trembled, but her smile was steady. "For the first time, I don't feel alone." Gabriel reached for her hand, warm and steady. "You never will again." And for the first time since her world shattered, Elena allowed herself to believe in something beyond survival. She believed in love. The Grand Metropolitan Hotel gleamed under the glow of chandeliers, its marble floors polished to a mirror's shine. It was the city's most anticipated gala of the year, attended by dignitaries, investors, celebrities, and the press. For weeks, speculation buzzed. Would Adrian Kane dare show his face after his spectacular fall? The answer came with a flash of cameras. Adrian walked in alone. No Sienna, no entourage, just a man clinging to the scraps of dignity his tailored suit tried to hide. His smile was thin, his eyes hollow, but he forced his way into conversations, pretending nothing had changed. Whispers followed him like shadows. "That's the man who lost everything. He looks desperate." Then the room shifted. The doors opened again, and silence rippled through the crowd. Elena Rivera entered on Gabriel Hunt's arm. Her gown shimmered like liquid silver, her posture regal, her belly carried proudly. She didn't hide the child anymore, she celebrated it. Gasps filled the hall, followed by applause. The crowd just see a woman scorned. They saw a phoenix risen from ashes. Adrian froze, his glass trembling in his hand. For the first time, he realized the truth. The room no longer belonged to him. It belonged to her. Elena and Gabriel moved through the crowd with quiet authority. Guests parted like water, eager to greet them. Cameras flashed, capturing the image that would dominate headlines. The disgraced billionaire in the corner, watching helplessly as his ex-wife claimed the spotlight he thought he owned. But the true blow came when Gabriel led Elena to the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," Gabriel began, his voice calm but commanding, "tonight we celebrate resilience, truth, and the power of integrity. No one embodies these values more than Elena Rivera." The applause thundered, but Gabriel wasn't finished. "And while we honor her strength, we must also acknowledge the dangers of unchecked arrogance and corruption. Adrian Kane believed he was untouchable. He believed he could betray his vows, commit fraud, and humiliate the woman who stood by him. Tonight, the world sees him for what he truly is, not a visionary, but a cautionary tale. All eyes turned to Adrian. His face burned crimson. "This is slander," he shouted, his voice cracking. "None of you would be here without me." The crowd recoiled. His outburst only confirmed what everyone already knew. The mask was gone. Then Elena stepped forward. Her voice was calm, steady, unshakable. "Adrian, you once told me I was nothing without you. Tonight, I stand here to prove you wrong. I am more without you than I ever was with you. And this child," she placed a hand on her belly, "is not your burden. He is my blessing. The world will remember him for the strength he gave me, not for the cruelty you tried to force upon us." The room erupted. Applause shook the chandeliers, drowning out Adrian's protests. He tried to push forward, but security blocked him, escorting him toward the exit. The image of him being dragged away while Elena stood radiant on stage was immortalized in every camera lens. By the time the night ended, Adrian Kane's reputation was beyond repair. The city didn't just see his fall, they celebrated it. And Elena Rivera, once invisible in his shadow, now stood at the pinnacle of respect and admiration, her hand in Gabriel's, her future finally her own. The hospital room was quiet, bathed in the soft glow of early morning light. Outside, the city roared on, but inside, time seemed to pause. Elena lay in the bed, her body exhausted, her face pale yet radiant with a kind of peace she hadn't felt in months. In her arms was the reason for everything, the tiny, perfect child she had fought for with every ounce of her strength. His little chest rose and fell against her, his soft cries replaced now by gentle breaths as he slept. Tears slipped down Elena's cheeks as she pressed her lips to his forehead. "You're safe now," she whispered. "You're here, and you'll never know the pain your father tried to force on you. You'll only know love." Gabriel stood by her side, his hand resting on her shoulder. He had been there through the long hours of labor, never leaving her, never wavering. When her strength faltered, he held her hand and reminded her she wasn't alone. Now, as he looked at the newborn, his usually composed face softened with awe. "He's perfect," Gabriel said quietly. Elena smiled weakly. "He is, and he's mine." Gabriel hesitated, then added, "Ours, if you'll let him be." Her eyes met his, shimmering with tears. There was no pressure in his words, only an offering, a promise. And for the first time in her life, Elena didn't feel like she had to fight alone. The door creaked open, and a nurse entered with a bouquet of flowers. "Congratulations, Mrs. Rivera," she said warmly. Then with a smile toward Gabriel, "And to you as well, Mr. Hunt." Elena laughed softly, shaking her head. "Not yet," she murmured. But the idea didn't frighten her. For once, the future wasn't something she dreaded. It was something she could look forward to. As the day passed, visitors came and went. Friends who had once turned away from the scandal now returned, offering congratulations. Reporters lingered outside the hospital, but for once, their stories were kind. Headlines read, "Elena Rivera welcomes new life after turmoil. From betrayal to triumph, a mother's victory." In the quiet hours of the evening, Gabriel finally persuaded Elena to rest. He held the baby in his arms, rocking gently, his large hands cradling the tiny form with surprising tenderness. He whispered words the child would never remember, but Elena heard through the haze of sleep. "You'll never want for anything. You'll never wonder if you're loved. I'll make sure of it." Elena drifted into slumber with a smile on her lips, knowing the promise wasn't empty. She had found not just safety, but a family. For months, she had carried grief, anger, humiliation. Now, with her baby nestled against her and Gabriel watching over them, those wounds began to heal. The pain hadn't vanished, it never fully would, but it no longer defined her. What defined her now was love. In another part of the city, Adrian Kane sat alone in a darkened apartment, the news of his child's birth flashing across the screen. The photo of Elena, glowing with her newborn in her arms, burned into his mind. He had lost them both, and he knew it was forever. Elena stirred awake, her baby cooing softly. She looked at Gabriel, who handed the child back to her with infinite care. She held her son close, her voice steady, filled with a strength she had earned through fire. "This," she whispered, "is the life we were meant to have." For Elena Rivera, healing had finally begun. Spring sunlight streamed through the Hunt Estate gardens, where cherry blossoms drifted lazily in the breeze. Elena sat beneath the blossoms, cradling her newborn son. Her laughter mingled with the baby's soft coos, a melody of peace she once thought impossible. Across the lawn, Gabriel approached, carrying a tray with tea and pastries. His steps were steady, his eyes warm as they met hers. He set the tray down and leaned in, kissing her temple. "How's our little fighter today?" Elena smiled, her heart swelling. Stronger every hour. Just like his father. Gabriel froze for a second, then his lips curved into a smile. She hadn't called him that before. And yet, in that simple word, a bond solidified, a promise that this child would grow up with not just a protector, but a father who truly loved him. Life had begun anew for Elena. She wasn't the abandoned wife anymore, nor the humiliated woman the tabloids once pitied. She was Elena Rivera Hunt, a mother, a partner, and a symbol of resilience the city now admired. Her story had been reborn as one of triumph. But miles away, Adrian Kane lived a very different reality. Once seated at the helm of an empire, he now sat in a cramped apartment, curtains drawn, bills piling on the counter. His accounts were frozen by federal investigations, his penthouse sold to cover debts, his board seat erased from memory. His phone, once buzzing with admirers and opportunities, lay silent. When it did ring, it was only creditors or lawyers. And the final blow came when he stepped into a cafe one morning, hoping for anonymity. A group of businessmen at the next table whispered, laughing. "Isn't that Kane?" One snickered. "Used to be a giant, now he's nothing." Adrian stormed out, his face burning. He was no longer feared, respected, or envied. He was a joke. As for Sienna Cross, the woman who thought betrayal was survival, her fall came even quicker. Her moment in the spotlight faded, her crocodile tears no longer convincing. Magazines labeled her a fraud, a fame-hungry opportunist. Invitations dried up, sponsors backed away, and her name became synonymous with scandal. In the end, she fled New York in disgrace, a cautionary tale whispered among socialites. Play with fire, and you burn. Meanwhile, Elena's star only rose higher. She launched a foundation with Gabriel, dedicated to supporting single mothers and women escaping abusive relationships. Her speeches inspired thousands, her story carried as a beacon of hope. She wasn't just surviving, she was changing lives. At the Hunt Estate, a celebration gathered family, friends, and allies. Toasts were raised not to wealth or power, but to love, resilience, and new beginnings. Gabriel stood before the guests, lifting his glass. "To Elena," he declared, his voice steady, proud, "the bravest woman I've ever known. You taught us all that, no matter how deep the betrayal, there is always a way to rise. And you didn't just rise, you soared." The crowd erupted in cheers. Elena's eyes shimmered with tears as she held her son close. In that moment, she felt the full weight of her journey, the humiliation, the heartbreak, the loneliness, and how it had all led here, to healing, to family, to triumph. Later that evening, when the guests had gone, Gabriel joined her in the nursery. Together, they watched their son sleep. Gabriel slipped an arm around her, his voice low. "We've come a long way." Elena rested her head against his chest. "And we'll go further. As a family." The baby stirred, letting out a soft sigh, and Elena smiled. She had kept her promise. She had protected him, and in the process she had saved herself. Adrian Kane was finished. Sienna Cross was forgotten. But Elena Rivera had become unforgettable. So, our story comes to a close. And if you're still here with us right now, my friend, it means something inside this journey has touched your heart in a very personal way. Maybe it reminded you of your own struggles, or maybe it lit a spark of courage you didn't know you had. The lesson is simple, yet powerful. No matter how deep the betrayal, no matter how heavy the storm, we always have the power to choose how we rise from it. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus once said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." Elena's story is living proof of that. She was broken, humiliated, abandoned, but instead of letting that define her, she used the pain to build strength and a dignity and a new beginning. And that's something each of us can carry into our own lives. When life turns cruel, we don't need to ask why me, but instead, what will I do with this moment? If this story touched you, give it a like, share it with someone who needs hope today, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Because here, together, we remind each other that no pain is wasted, and every ending can be the start of something greater. The city never slept, but that night it was colder than usual, a biting winter wind tearing through the empty streets. Inside a penthouse glittering with wealth, Adrian Kane, the man the tabloids worshipped as the golden billionaire, wasn't with his pregnant wife. No. He was tangled in silk sheets with Sienna Cross, his young and ambitious mistress, laughing over champagne as if his world would never crumble. Meanwhile, Elena Rivera, his wife of 3 years, sat in their dimly lit bedroom, her trembling hands cradling her belly. She was 6 months pregnant, fragile, yet fiercely protective of the child growing inside her. When Adrian finally returned at dawn, reeking of perfume that wasn't hers, she begged him for honesty. His response was colder than the snow outside. "This baby will ruin everything," Adrian snapped, his voice slicing through her like a blade. "If you want me to stay, you'll end this pregnancy. I won't be chained by a mistake." The words were poison. Elena's heart stopped, her body numb as she realized the man she had once trusted with her soul was demanding the unthinkable. Tears burned her eyes, but Adrian was unmoved. Beside him, Sienna smirked, her manicured hand resting possessively on his arm as if she had already won. Elena shook her head. "No, I can't do that. This child is innocent." Adrian's face hardened. "Then you'll be alone. Don't expect my name, my money, or my protection." The silence after his words was deafening. Elena collapsed onto the bed, sobbing, while Adrian stormed out with Sienna at his side. The sound of the door slamming was like a coffin lid sealing shut. Outside, the storm raged, snow piling against the glass windows. Inside, Elena felt as if the world had ended. She pressed her palm against her stomach, whispering to the tiny heartbeat inside her, "I'll protect you, no matter what." She had no idea that this night, the night her husband abandoned her for another woman, would not be her ending. It would be the beginning of a war that would shake the empire Adrian built and expose secrets powerful enough to destroy him. For as Adrian celebrated with his mistress, a single phone call was about to shatter his smug confidence, a call that would remind him of the one truth he could never bury. His ex-wife was still carrying his baby. Elena Rivera had never been the kind of woman who chased glittering lights or fortune. She grew up in a modest neighborhood on the outskirts of Chicago, raised by a single mother who worked double shifts at a diner just to keep the lights on. From her mother, Elena inherited a quiet resilience, the ability to keep standing even when the world tried to knock her down. She studied architecture at a state university, sketching buildings in the margins of her notebooks and dreaming of designing homes where families could feel safe and loved, something she herself had always longed for. When she first met Adrian Kane, he was everything she thought she didn't want: wealthy, arrogant, and dazzling in ways that made her feel invisible. But Adrian had a charm that could disarm even the most cautious heart. At a charity event where Elena had been volunteering, he spotted her across the room. Unlike the glamorous women dripping in diamonds, Elena wore a simple navy dress, her hair tied back in a neat bun. Adrian approached her with a glass of wine and a smile that promised the world. For months, he pursued her relentlessly. He sent flowers to her tiny apartment, left handwritten notes at her office, and spoke words that felt like music to a woman who had known too much struggle and too little tenderness. Against her better judgment, Elena let herself believe. She let herself fall in love. Their marriage was a whirlwind. Lavish trips, a penthouse overlooking Central Park, a life she had never imagined possible. But beneath the sparkle was something darker. Adrian was obsessed with appearances. He adored the idea of Elena as his trophy wife, elegant, quiet, always smiling at his side, but he dismissed her dreams. "Architecture is just a hobby," he would say with a laugh. "You don't need to work. You have me." Elena gave up her career to build a life with him. She decorated their home, planned charity events, and told herself she was happy. But when she found out she was pregnant, she believed it was her chance to finally give Adrian what money couldn't buy: a family, a legacy, a reason to love her beyond appearances. For a brief moment she thought he was thrilled. He kissed her belly, whispered about the future, promised he would be a good father. Elena began sketching nurseries in her spare time, imagining a little boy or girl running across the marble floors of their home. She was glowing, full of hope. But as her body changed, so did Adrian. His touches grew colder, his absences longer, his temper sharper. He accused her of being clingy, of ruining her figure, of trapping him. And then came the night that shattered her illusions. The night he came home from Sienna's arms and demanded she end the pregnancy. Elena's entire world collapsed. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for her child, a child whose only crime was existing. Vulnerable, isolated, and pregnant, she stood at the edge of despair, holding on to the faint light of maternal love. She had no father for her baby, no career, no security. All she had was a promise she whispered into the silence. I will protect you, little one, no matter who tries to take you away from me. She didn't know then that this vow would ignite a storm powerful enough to destroy Adrian Kane's empire, shake the walls of New York's elite, and introduce a new force into her life. Someone who would not just save her, but teach her what true love and loyalty meant. New York City was a beast that never rested, a place where fortunes were made and reputations destroyed in a single night. For Adrian Kane, it was his playground. He loved nothing more than parading his power across the city's most exclusive venues, where the chandeliers sparkled like captured stars and every glass of champagne tasted like triumph. The Kane penthouse was a reflection of his ego, 60 stories above the streets, with floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the skyline like a painting. Marble floors gleamed under imported crystal lights, and every piece of furniture was hand-picked by European designers. It was the kind of place meant to impress, not to be lived in. To the world, it screamed success. To Elena, it felt like a cage. Adrian thrived in this glittering world of galas, charity banquets, and business dinners that were more about showing off than giving back. Each event was carefully curated. Guest lists filled with politicians, CEOs, celebrities, and socialites who thrived on whispers and speculation. For Elena, these evenings were suffocating. She smiled through conversations about hedge funds and art auctions, clutching a glass of sparkling water while her stomach fluttered with the baby she carried. No one noticed her discomfort. No one cared. She was Adrian's wife, and that was enough for them. But beneath the polished surface of this high society world, cracks were forming. Rumors of Adrian's infidelity began as faint murmurs, then grew into conversations Elena couldn't ignore. At one gala, she caught sight of him slipping away with Sienna Cross, the ambitious young assistant who seemed to be everywhere Adrian was. Sienna fit perfectly into this world. Her designer gowns hugged her curves, her laughter carried across the room like a siren's call. People whispered, but no one dared confront him. Adrian Kane was untouchable. The city's elite operated under unspoken rules. Scandals were tolerated, but weakness was not. And in this world, Elena was painted as weak, too quiet, too modest, too devoted to her unborn child to play the games of power that everyone else lived for. Adrian reminded her of it often. "You don't belong here," he would hiss when the cameras weren't rolling. "You're lucky to be by my side at all." Yet it was in this very world that everything would unravel. The grand ballrooms, the candlelit restaurants, the penthouse parties, they were supposed to elevate Adrian, but they would become the stage of his humiliation. For when Elena, humiliated and heartbroken, finally decided to walk away, she would not disappear quietly. Every chandelier, every velvet curtain, every glittering champagne flute would bear witness to a reversal no one saw coming. The woman they once pitied would become the woman they feared. The whispers that once mocked her would turn into applause. And Adrian Kane, who strutted through Manhattan as if he owned it, would discover what it meant to lose everything in front of the very people he had tried to impress. For now, though, Elena endured the suffocating atmosphere of these gatherings, her hand resting protectively over her belly as she listened to hollow conversations. The music swelled, the lights shimmered, and Adrian laughed with his mistress, just a few feet away. The city had crowned him its golden king. But fate was preparing to strip away his crown, one cruel piece at a time. Adrian Kane had mastered the art of deception. To the outside world, he was the golden billionaire, a self-made mogul who had risen from nothing to dominate New York's skyline with his real estate empire. The tabloids adored him, plastering his face on magazine covers with headlines that praised his brilliance. Investors called him a visionary. Politicians sought his donations. To the world, he was untouchable. But behind the glossy image was a man who valued power above everything else. Adrian thrived on control. He controlled his business, his image, and most of all, the people closest to him. He believed loyalty was a weakness and compassion was a liability. His relationships were transactional, his affections shallow. To him, Elena had been a perfect accessory, a quiet, beautiful woman who enhanced his image without challenging it. He never saw her as a partner, only as a piece of his curated life. Adrian's true nature showed in private moments. He belittled Elena's career dreams, mocked her simplicity, and treated her pregnancy as an inconvenience rather than a blessing. He saw children not as symbols of love, but as potential obstacles to his empire. "A baby ties a man down," he once sneered. "I'm not the type to be chained." And then there was Sienna Cross. Sienna was everything Adrian wanted in his new life. Bold, ruthless, and unapologetically ambitious. At 26, she had clawed her way from being a junior assistant into Adrian's inner circle. She knew how to play the part. Tight dresses, flawless makeup, a smile that could charm a room. But beneath the gloss, she was calculating. Sienna saw Adrian not as a man, but as a ladder. Each whispered promise, each stolen moment was a rung that would take her higher. Adrian was captivated. With Sienna, he felt admired, worshipped. She stroked his ego, told him he was unstoppable, and pushed him to shed the dead weight of his wife and unborn child. "You could have everything," she whispered in his ear one night, her red lips curving into a smile, "but not with her dragging you down." Her words sank deep into him, feeding his arrogance and cruelty. Soon, Adrian wasn't just unfaithful, he was openly flaunting his mistress. At galas, he kept Sienna close enough to spark whispers but far enough to deny scandal. At the office, she sat in on meetings she had no business attending, her presence a silent insult to Elena. Adrian thrived on the danger, the thrill of humiliation. He believed he could balance it all, the public image of a devoted husband and the private indulgence of a younger lover. But arrogance blinds. Adrian underestimated Elena. He saw her as fragile, powerless, incapable of fighting back. He assumed she would stay silent, just as she always had. What he didn't realize was that betrayal has a way of awakening strength in the most unexpected hearts. Adrian Kane was not just a husband who strayed. He was a man whose ambition poisoned his soul, whose greed destroyed his family, and whose downfall would be as spectacular as his rise. And when it came, it would not come quietly. The same glittering world that had crowned him king would one day watch as he fell, piece by humiliating piece. And by his side, Sienna would learn the bitter truth. Queens made of glass shatter fastest when the spotlight turns. The night was supposed to be dazzling. The Crystal Renaissance Hotel glittered with chandeliers, violins sang in the background, and New York's elite gathered in gowns and tuxedos worth more than most people's homes. It was the annual Kane Foundation Gala, an event Adrian had built into a spectacle designed to showcase his wealth, power, and influence. Cameras lined the entrance, waiting to capture the golden billionaire and his radiant wife. But when the limousine doors opened, Elena was nowhere in sight. Instead, on Adrian's arm was Sienna Cross. Gasps rippled through the crowd like a wave. Sienna wore a scarlet gown that clung to her body, her lips painted the same brazen shade of red. Adrian didn't flinch. He smiled for the cameras, pulling her close as if daring anyone to question him. Flashes exploded, and within minutes, the whispers began. "Where's his wife?" someone muttered. "Isn't she pregnant?" another hissed. "God, he brought his mistress here, in public." Inside the ballroom, Elena stood frozen. She hadn't expected this. Not tonight, not so brazenly. She had come to support Adrian, believing the rumors were exaggerated, clinging to the hope that he still respected their vows. Her 6-month belly pressed against her silk gown as she tried to breathe through the suffocating wave of humiliation, and then Adrian saw her. For a moment, his confident smirk faltered. But then he tightened his grip on Sienna and strode forward, ignoring Elena as though she were invisible. The orchestra swelled, but the air in the room cracked with tension. "Elena," a board member whispered in pity. "She shouldn't be here." Sienna, basking in the attention, leaned closer to Adrian and murmured loud enough for Elena to hear. "You should have left her at home. She looks pathetic." Elena's face burned. Every eye seemed fixed on her, judging, whispering, dissecting her pain. She tried to step back, to slip away unnoticed, but her heel caught the edge of the marble stair. She stumbled, clutching her stomach as a collective gasp echoed through the room. Adrian didn't move. He didn't rush to her side. He didn't even blink. It was Gabriel Hunt, a reclusive billionaire investor and longtime acquaintance of Elena's family, who crossed the room in an instant. He caught her arm, steadying her as she fought back tears. "Easy," he murmured, his voice low, steady. "I've got you." The cameras snapped furiously. The image of Adrian ignoring his pregnant wife while another man protected her was seared into memory and into tomorrow's headlines. Adrian's jaw tightened, rage flashing in his eyes. He had wanted to flaunt his mistress, to provoke whispers, to prove he was untouchable. But now the narrative was slipping beyond his control. The gala, meant to celebrate his empire, had turned into the stage of his betrayal. And as Elena stood upright with Gabriel at her side, she realized something profound. The humiliation was unbearable, yes. But it was also liberating. In that single moment, she knew Adrian had already lost something far greater than reputation. He had lost her. The crowd erupted in whispers again, the orchestra's music struggling to mask the scandal unraveling in real time. And Adrian Kane, for the first time in his charmed life, felt the weight of a truth he could not silence.